Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Communications and Cigars. I am your host, John Crook. Thank you very much for going ahead and joining into the show here. It's always great there. We got a couple things that we're working on here, but we got it going on here. Thank you. This is obviously a live episode, and we thank you for tuning in. And tonight's episode is going to be Season 2, Episode 10, LMR Multi-Band Radios. And we're going to be talking about multi-band radios, not dual band radios necessarily, but multi-band radios. And we're also going to go ahead and talk a little bit about multi-mode radios. That's correct. So that's this week's title, episode on communications and cigars. So thank you for everybody for going in and turning into it here. I know it was kind of a last minute posting. I apologize. The reason being is that I got stuff and toys to go ahead and show you tonight here and everything, and that doesn't look too good with the green screen. Hopefully this will look better, and we're going to talk about a few of them because it's important to understand that there is a difference between multi-band, multi-mode, and like the amateur version and the LMR version out there. But before we get into this, we want to go ahead and always say thank you very much for tuning in. If you ever have questions, comments about the show, stuff like that related to the show, I know I wear a couple different hats on different things and stuff, so I'm always asking, make sure you go ahead, and we like to hear stuff about the show and everything, but keep it to the show here, communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. Once again, communications-cigars at jjkcom.com. Yes, JJK Communications is a sponsor of our show. They're the ones that we always say that buys us all this nice, expensive equipment and buys us the new toys and stuff we can go ahead and play with and all that kind of jazz on there. But once again, thank you very much to that. But remember, we are not a specific brand or anything like that on there. So we do like to go ahead and keep it, non-vendor specific, non-specific, not amateur related stuff. We like to kind of go outside of that amateur realm out there. A lot of people talk about amateurs. A lot of people I know, fellow YouTubers, people I've been on their shows and stuff, they got that whole amateur section covered. You know what? I'm not going to go ahead and go into there. I like to talk about the non-amateur thing. It's my little relief away from the amateur world sometimes. So that's why it's on there. But hey, guess what? The show is called Communications and Cigars. We're obviously going to talk about communications, but let's go ahead and talk about cigars. Now, when we had our last episode, we did talk about some things on cigars and different aspects of it. And then there are three kind of parts to a cigar. There's flavor, there's body, and there's strength. We talked about flavor. Let's talk about body tonight. So the body is really of a cigar is really describes the smoke delivered by the cigar, how the sensation is, how the texture of the smoke is, the flavor, those kind of things like that on there. And unfortunately, when you get into the body of thing, these descriptions can be very subjective, as everyone really does tend to, how do you want to say, interpret a cigar differently. Alrighty. There are people that just like a cigar with the smoke, with the flavor, with the texture, everything on there, as compared to having flavors and that. And I would say this is probably going to be almost one of the hardest things for people to grasp. And the reason it's hard for people to grasp is that because it's sort of, it adds to the whole aspect of things on there. And the reason I say it that way is because really the body will cause some people to hate the cigar, some people to love the cigar, or it's sort of to a degree like if you go into wine tasting or stuff like that on there, that different things will promote different flavors and different aspects of a cigar. And I give you an example, doing wine. So my wife handles the wine, I handle the cigars, but there are certain types of wine out there that you can have, and by themselves are okay, but when you add, like, let's say chocolate, or you add things that you're going to eat with, red wines with meat and white wines with fish, those kind of things, it really can accentuate the flavor of the wine. Cigars are that same thing with the body. You can accentuate something on there. Now, if you were on our Facebook page, Communications and Cigars, you saw we did a little pre-show earlier. It was about 2 hours before the show. I was out there having tonight a Macanudo Vanilla. Now, I like flavored cigars. Not all flavored cigars, I'll tell you that, but I do like a fair amount of flavored cigars. And in that case, it really has to be pleasing to the pleasing. I can't even say it. Pleasing to the palate. And in that case, what I'm talking about is that when I take the smoke in, what does it have? Is it smooth? Does it kind of give those kind of things? Like, does it have a bad taste to the mouth? Does it leave a taste? Is that, God, this is a vanilla flavor. This is horrible. This is actually horrible. But also, too, with the body of a cigar, it really can also invoke emotions and flavors and everything like that inside of something on there. So in other words, some people may have a cigar that is a certain type of body, that is a certain type of flavors to it, that will make them calm, that will maybe get their heart racing, that will do this or this or this or this. And it's kind of interesting because it's somewhat psychological in a way. It's like, smelling certain foods, or like, that time, like around Christmas time, a good example, people smell fresh baked chocolate chip cookies, and it takes them back to their mind of like when grandma did this and all those things like that on there. So in that kind of thing, it really kind of invokes those kind of sensations and stuff like that on there. But certain bodies and flavors and stuff are going to go ahead and do that. And the body, I would say, is really going to be above and beyond the flavor, because we talked about flavor. Like I said, that's going to be your definite on there, but the body is really how it's going to get into you. Alrighty, how that is. I've had cigars that have been seasoned or flavored, however you want to call it, and they've been great, but the delivery of the body is just horrible. Alrighty, or the body is a smooth smoke, and then it just leaves a horrible aftertaste. So there's a lot involved with the body. And unfortunately, I will tell you, you could have 10 different cigar smokers lined up in a room, all smoking different cigars, and each of them are going to tell you, I like this one because of this and this. Or you can have them all smoke the same cigar, and guess what? They're going to go ahead and feel, and it's going to be completely different on there. So that's the kind of the cigar part of Communications and Cigars this evening. Now, before we get into it, I thought it would be a little fun. Okay, this weekend the weather's getting better here in Wisconsin, and we're close to Minnesota. That I actually did something, and for our 1-year anniversary last September, we gave away some shirts, and you had two choices. You could the winners were able to choose a Communications Cigars shirt, or they were able to choose the great and famous Porta Potties on the Air, the PPOTA. Yes, the PPOTA was started by me, was talked about on the show here. There are some other PPOTA fakers out there, but nope, the show started here. And you know what? I thought, what would be a great way to go ahead and do that than to get out and do a little PPOTA this weekend. Yes, that's right. Here I am out there in the cold doing P25 PPOTA. So Porta Potties on the Air, but we were doing P25. And yes, I was trying to make a few contacts on some of the P25 repeaters. Fortunately, the ones I was on or able to get on, guess what? Not a really lot of contacts on there, not a lot of good frequencies. There is one. This is actually taken over in Stillwater, Minnesota. So if anybody's watching, know where that's at. I was over there at Nelson's, and I'll show you where I was at, Nelson's Ice Cream. But hey, what a good opportunity for a photo shoot for P25 PPOTA. No, guys that run the P25 UHF in Stillwater, nope, I did not have your frequency in there. I do apologize. So there I was on there. There I was trying to make contacts, handhelds, obviously, on the VHF, UHF. So guess what? I had to go ahead and try repeaters on there. Unfortunately, not too successful. But guess what was the best part about it was the ice cream. Yes, this is the ice cream that they're Nelson's Ice Cream in good old Stillwater. If you want to go ahead and fight your diabetes, well, go ahead and go there to them. And yeah, so that was it there. Beautiful ice cream. As a matter of fact, that actually was 3 ice creams in one. There's actually, this was the brownie, or no, the brownie s'mores, and then below that in the cup was chocolate chip cookie dough, and below that was the Foundation 100 year celebration. So a lot of ice cream. I did not fully eat it. No, contrary to what people believe, that was not a situation where I had the ice cream in there, and it was a byproduct of the PPOTA. No, it was not there. All right, but let's go back. Let's talk about multi-band radios. So, what is multi-band? Is it more than dual band? Yeah, it is in this case. And here's why. We're going to start out with the amateur understanding. So the amateur understanding, yep, here I go. Got my trusty little FT5 handheld here. This is dual band. And the reason it's called dual band is because it does VHF and UHF, right? It's a dual band radio on there. But the issue that we run into from the LMR aspect is when we talk about LMR too, we're talking about like business bands and stuff like that on there, public safety bands, those kind of things. There's more obviously frequencies of available usage in the LMR business world than there are for the amateur world. There is. Amateur world by far, hands down, VHF, UHF, dual bands, there's our. Yes, we have 220. Yes, we have 900. Yes, we have 1.2 gigs. But in all essence, all reality, let's face it, not a lot of people are making those kind of radios. The 220 band is not easy to do, okay? As a matter of fact, there's business 220 also. 900, same thing, as well as 1.2 gigs. But when we look at business, we look at public safety, little different because there are more bands to operate. So when we start to go up into the commercial line, we're talking now about Part 90 radios is what we're talking about today. So here's this one, the common Anytone. Yes, everybody knows what the hell an Anytone is and everything like that. Yes, this is the DMR version. And this is technically a dual band, alrighty? And with this, it's a dual band because it does VHF and it does UHF, but it's Part 90, so that's why it's commercial. Believe it or not, DMR is a commercial standard. There's not any Part 95 radios made in DMR or P25 or Next and all those, because those are commercial standard-based radios, right? The technologies, right? So with that being said, these are still dual band. Now, when we get into the commercial realm, obviously VHF and UHF are the two most popular bands for public safety, business use. Well, let me back off public safety. Let me take them out of there for a second. But for commercial business band stuff, a lot of UHF stuff is commercial. A lot, 450 all the way up through the technically almost the 470s. A lot of commercial stuff that's built into there. You got a lot of your, not only FRS, which can be now used for business, but you have a lot of the UHF repeaters, the, what I call the little business radios on there, the little Motorola's or the Kenwoods on there. They got like 99 channels or 90, business channels and stuff like that on there. Those are set up for, 2 watts, low power, those kind of things like that on there. Really heavy. Then you do have the VHF bands, right? The VHF bands, there is a lot of business stuff still in the VHF bands. Some of the stuff that JJK Communications has for rental is on the VHF bands and VHF frequencies on there. That's opened up a lot because public safety is migrating off of there. Now, yes, there is 800 and 900 megahertz business band stuff, but not as much as there used to be. And the reason that they're not as much as it used to be, for a while there, 800 megahertz was filled with SMR, okay, specialized mobile radio. And that's really where a lot of the trunk systems came out of. I mean, I remember starting late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, good God, you could grab a stone and go into the Twin Cities and like literally throw a stone and hit an SMR repeater, and usually they were trunked. GE had their own version of SMR 800 megahertz trunked. They called G-Mark. Then they had EDAX, and then there was Motorola Type 1, Type 2 trunking, all these kind of things like that. But what happened is that 9/11 obviously happened, very big pivotal thing, because now what it did is started to shift public safety to try to use 800 megahertz more. And then that's where we're coming into the court. Okay, this is actually a lime green one, but my my green screen there. But that's where we started to come into these realms now of needing multi-band stuff, not dual band, because we didn't need just VHF and UHF. We need VHF, UHF, and 800. Now, multi-band is a pretty big pill to swallow for a lot of people. And the reason being is, realistically, public safety used to be clumped with usage by surrounding agencies or departments. If you think of that, before trunk systems, before statewide networks and stuff like that, that's another pain in the ass we'll talk about on maybe another show. But before we did all that kind of stuff on there, used to have it. And I'm going to use an example of St. Paul and Minneapolis. St. Paul, Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, they were UHF systems. They were they were busy heart of senders things with a lot of activity, but a lot of building penetration needed to be used. So they needed the UHF aspect to penetrate through those buildings. So St. Paul was using UHF. Minneapolis was using UHF. Okay. A lot of metro areas, even like EMS, there was these med channels, which were specified UHF frequencies that would do all these UHF frequencies and blah, 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 blah. Right. Okay. Understand that. Then when you got out to more of your surrounding counties and stuff, what you then started to see was VHF usage primarily. Okay. Because VHF gave better range. So bigger counties, bigger areas would have that. Minnesota State Patrol, before they went 800. Wisconsin State Patrol, well, that's a little different story. They're still on VHF, but they're VHF trunk, but they're going to another system now with the new Wiscom system. But what I'm getting at is that they would do VHF because they were huge areas that they needed to have coverage, right? They needed to cover large territories. So they were there. But then you had some places that were 800, that were experimenting and moving into 800 because 800 was somewhat of an open band. 800 used to be very popular with the cell phones, right? Cell phones first started out in 800, and then they kind of expanded up. Some did the PCS, which got into like the 1900 band, and then they started to go all over the place. And now we have cell phone companies that are 800, 1900, 700, all that kind of stuff there. But going back to just radio stuff. But what happened is that they started to look at, and at post 9/11, they said, how can we all get on the same thing? Because think of it this way. If you have something that happens in St. Paul, let's say a chase pursuit or something, once you're out of city limits of St. Paul, and let's say you're going towards Wisconsin, because it's not that far away, now you cross into an area that's VHF coverage, but then you're crossing over into another state, which is VHF, and there's no UHF coverage. Now, some agencies, some places had multiple radios. So they had, in essence, dual mobiles in their car. So they had UHF mobiles and they had VHF mobiles and everything like that. But what really started to happen is that they were starting to find out that everybody was across the board. And even if you didn't have weird offset like public safety was UHF and this and this and this, you usually had a split or division with different government agencies. And what I mean by that is like you had, let's say, your police might be VHF, your fire might be VHF, your EMS might be UHF, and then your public works might be UHF. So it was a mess. And the problem was that everybody thinks you should be on their channel, right? Or everybody thinks that you should be on there. So when we started to take a look, and this was a big thing for public safety, when they started to take a look at this stuff and they said, well, how do we deal with this? And the way they said we deal with this is, okay, if this agency has the crap show taking place, they stay on their channel and then everybody comes to their channel. Okay, problem. Because the problem is that if one agency is on UHF, one's on VHF, how the hell do you do it? You got to use different radios. Okay, that started happening. So the issue came into saying, well, how do you adapt? How do you do to these things? And obviously the way was as well, you have multiple radios. So you have maybe this radio is VHF, and maybe this radio is 800, and then you use this one, but then, okay, there's a pursuit and you got to go, then you pick up the second one, and it's like, oh, Jesus, God, that was horrible. And as I was a days of dispatching, they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to patch. Everybody's going to go ahead and patch. Okay, that solved an issue to a degree and a small degree, because now all of a sudden my patch, well, yes, it took VHF users to maybe 800, VHF to UHF, whatever. And the issue now created is you are limited by the range of how far your system reaches. So once again, using the example of St. Paul, Minnesota, when they were on UHF, they didn't give a damn about covering out really like all of Ramsey County or all of the metro area. They cared about St. Paul. Good, because they take care of St. Paul. They don't take care of anything else, right? So if something happened and it spills outside of St. Paul, well, yes, you could patch the St. Paul channel to, let's say, the Ramsey County channel or whatever patching may have taken place, but that's good. But then once you get out of the range of the St. Paul system, what do you do then? So they went along, and this was a big issue that was done for a while. So the ultimate answer was, well, we go to these new radio systems and we create statewide trunked radio systems or regional trunk systems and everything like that. Okay, that works, but it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because you can't necessarily put all the users you may need to communicate with on that radio system. And you're like, yeah, you can. Why can't I go ahead and talk? If I need to talk to fire, if they're on the trunk radio system, I put their talk group in there. Well, okay, yes, you can. Well, if I need to talk to EMS, fire needs to talk to EMS, and they don't happen to be a joint department, separate thing, why can't I put their talk group? Okay, yes, you can. Well, Public Works said that. Okay, yeah, you could. But there's also times where people aren't going to move, right? Nothing is forcing anybody to go on statewide radio systems. Why does a public works agency need to go on a statewide radio system? Because guess what? It's going to cost money. It's going to do things. It's going to create these things. And rightfully so. Rightfully so. You know, if you got a small town public works department and it's going to cost them $50,000 to move over to a radio system and they have their own good radio system, why should they be forced to move? This is a question that needs to be answered. But we now have this issue. And this issue comes into now these days of strategic partnership. Okay? And what do I mean by strategic partnership? I mean having certain partners that law enforcement, fire, EMS, public works work with, but they're not considered public safety. Good example, school systems, school resource officers. When I grew up, and you know, when I graduated high school, no, there was nothing such as a school resource officer, okay? There was, hey, the officer stops by every once in a while, and yeah, you took DARE class and you learned how to go ahead and use the good, well, back in 80s and 90s, DARE class was like, use this, because this will get you high quick, right? Just kidding, folks. But you want to talk to school. So school resource officer is communicating with the school. So now, hey, wait a minute here. I'm a school resource officer. I'm on a digital P25 800 megahertz trunked radio system, and the school is on a UHF conventional radio system. Great. So now, as a school resource officer, I get to carry a school radio. I get to carry a public safety. Crap. That's not going to work. Like that guy. What? No way. Right? So we had in public safety and business. Now, mind you, we had dual band radios that were out there. They've been out there for a while. Alrighty. Vertex, Yaesu actually had one. Motorola had an older one. But they kind of died off. These are radios like in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. They were like 32 channels only. and they were really limited on what they can do. They were conventional because there was no such thing as digital back then, but they were conventional, and it was really weird because like you couldn't necessarily put VHF and UHF in the same things. Like if you take an amateur radio, whoops, as it falls here. If you take an amateur radio, or we'll even go for that matter, like even like a business radio, and if it's dual band capable, you can mix the stuff together, right? You could mix it and you could say, okay, channel 1 is VHF, channel 2 is UHF, channel 3 is VHF, 4, 5, and 6 are UHF. Yeah, you could mix that. But the older radios, you couldn't. Now, let's go ahead and compound the issue even more. Now what we're doing is now we're saying, wait a minute, not only are we going to be multi-band, but we need to intermix things. Okay, great. This is going to be a problem. And now we're not just VHF and UHF. That's been the easy pill to swallow for the longest time. But now we have 800, now we have 700, now we have 900. So Motorola was first to the beat there, and they came out with the APX 7000 series. And that was actually the first of the APX series on here, was the 7000. Now this is my 7000 XE, okay? Big firefighter one on there. But guess what? You had the choice of two bands. You could do 700 and 800, which was really the main flav, okay, for a lot of the stuff. And then you could do VHF, or you could do 700, 800, and then UHF. Now, there were a very few, those are usually rare, but even the more rare unobtainium was the VHF, UHF ones. That was VHF, UHF, no 700 or 800 megahertz. Now, a lot of the hammy people loved that. Yeah, I was one of them too. I would love to get a blue case, a VHF, UHF, APX 7000. So if anybody wants to hook a brother up, right? But what happened was that Motorola said, you know what? We need to go ahead and the dual bands are great, because a lot of people would be on 800 megahertz systems, but then they still need to talk on VHF interoperability. Now, I'm going to use my Midwest thing. Illinois. You people down in Illinois, you Starcommers, right? Starcom 21, greatest public safety, privately owned Motorola system. Okay, anyways, but that was all 700, 800 megahertz statewide, right? But guess what? When you get up to Wisconsin, we're good old VHF boys up here, right? And then some places were UHF. Rock County was UHF. Point of getting at is that now we have a mix. And now we have a mix of things where we can't just do a dual band. We can't do 700, 800. And by the way, when you have 700, 800, it's usually one radio that does that, okay? So that's one band. And then 700, 800, and then VHF, or 700, 800, and then UHF. We needed to come up with multi-band radios. We needed to say 700, 800, VHF, and UHF. Because now I'm 700, 800 for my policing, my fire and EMS activities. But now I got to do mutual aid, and the fire tactical channels are still VHF, and those are nationwide. So now I changed it to VHF. Okay, oh, crap. Now, guess what? I'm needing to talk to my public works. I need UHF. Well, guess what? Now I'm back to these two things. Ah, crap. Now I'm back there. So Motorola said, how can we make more money? And, you know, the old joke, right? The old joke was with Motorola, the model number is reflective of the price. So then Motorola came up with the APX 8000 series. Now that was multi-band. Now that gave you 700, 800, then you could do VHF, and then you could do UHF on there. So now you had that. And then Kenwood finally got their act together, Kenwood E.F. Johnson, and then they came up with like this little baby here. This is my new baby. I love you. I may actually sleep with that. My wife probably doesn't know I'm cheating on her with this. But anyways, this is the new concept of VHF, UHF, and 700 and 800 megahertz. And that's where now we're getting into multi-band radios. We're no longer just two, we're going into multi-band purposes, multi-band radios. Now, good comment just appeared here. Ben popped up there. One of the ways they're trying to solve this is they're trying to create gateways or ISSIs between the different trunk networks. That works and that doesn't. It works when you can tie trunk systems together and you can have roaming. But in a lot of cases, if you're not on a trunk system, or what we're going to talk about the next kind of part of phase here too, is that now we're getting into this thing where we're saying, ooh, we're getting into weird things here, because not every system can be connected to a trunk radio system. And perfectly honest with you, you don't want every system connected to a trunk radio system, because now think of it this way. Think of it, if I'm on a system. So let's just say I'm fire and EMS. Okay, fire and EMS. Let's say the trunk radio system on is 700, 800 megahertz. Great. I'm on my main dispatch talk group. Yeah, dispatch, go ahead. Da 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 da. Okay, great. Hey, go ahead. But now, big mutual aid thing. Okay, we had the big fires up in Wisconsin, had a MABUS activation about a week and change ago and everything. Now, guess what? That's VHF tactical channels. Okay, guess what? Now I switch zones. Now I'm on my VHF tactical channels. But guess what? Maybe I have a mobile repeater system in my ambulances or rigs. Maybe we are working with strategic partners, which might be the schools, which might be a business, which might be something. And let's say they're on UHF networks. Now with multiband, or by public works agencies. Now with multiband, I change it. And now, in essence, I have, once again, multiple bands and multiple agencies that are now capable of communication with just one radio. I no longer need to have a dual band and this, or to two single band radios, with one being, let's say, 800, one being VHF. I don't need that anymore. I have that all capability in this radio. Now, one of the other things that I should have put in the title, but I didn't, is now we're reaching into the world of multi-protocol radios. And I'll tell you, you Motorola people, you're going to get your butts kicked, because here's why. Multi-band radio for Motorola, yeah, I got VHF, I got P25 phase 1, maybe P25 phase 2. But now, with my Kenwood E.F. Johnson, or even a Kenwood monoband, you might have a multi-protocol or multi-band radio like this is, and now you can get multi-protocol. I can do P25, I can do DMR, and now that is really expanding the aspects of what I'm capable of doing with this radio. Now that interoperability, now we solve the issue of how can I connect? How do I go from network to network? How can I have a long range incident and still stay, in essence, in communication when I'm out of my home range? Well, now we have that. Now I can bounce from different bands, but now I can bounce to different protocols. Now I can say, hey, I might be trunked I might be 700, 800 megahertz P25 phase 1 trunked or phase 2 trunked. Now I can go to VHF tactical channels. So for those that might be aware of, like, your Fireground Reds, Fireground Blues, those kind of thing in Wisconsin, or you may know them as V-Fire 21, V-Fire 22, V-Fire 23, those kind of things like that. I can do that on there. But now if I need to talk to my public works, which might be UHF DMR, guess what? I can do that now. And that is a pretty progressive thing on there. And Kenwood started it with the NX series, the NX 5000 series. Now, the reason I'm bringing up this is because it's the topic of the conversation. I know some people are saying, well, John, you told you're non-specific. Yeah, I know, but Kenwood's the only one that's doing it right now. I can only hope and pray to God that this happens. But I don't think it's going to happen in the amateur world. I'm sorry, folks. It's not going to on there. But now, really what happens is that you can have with these radios that are coming out now, you can have a monoband multi-protocol. So you can have migration. You can have interoperability. You know, you could have it on VHF and do VHF FM, VHF P25, and then VHF DMR. Or maybe you can do DMR and NextEnd, or maybe you could do P25 and NextEnd. Point of the matter is they're multi-protocols. And before your multi-bands, at least with Motorola, your multi-bands was basically FM and P25. But now you're getting into multi-band and multi-protocol. This is going to be a communication changer. Alrighty? It really is. Now, yes, there are manufacturers out there such as Harris. Harris has solved that a little bit with doing an LTE chip in their radio. So there's a couple FirstNet radios out there that basically the radio, and I don't have a Harris FirstNet radio, but are basically kind of a multi-band, you know, like a VHF, UHF, or VHF 800 kind of thing. But then it also has LTE capabilities where you basically put a FirstNet SIM card in there. And in essence, what you do is you're on your RF by the antenna, but then you switch over, then you can go to the network aspect, and then you can actually talk through the FirstNet system of the way that's kind of in there. So now what you're doing is you're riding on the FirstNet network to go through some sort of LTE type radio system, you know, like probably FirstNet push to talk, those kind of things on there. But that is difficult to fall into, and it's a great concept. But now once again, you're relying on cellular networks. It's good for that. There's a lot of subjective versus objective things about that. But when you're talking about, hey, I don't want to be on an LTE network, I want to be on a RF network, but I want to be able to be on a multi-band network, VHF, UHF 700, 800, I can do that. And now I can also do multi-protocol. So I could do UHF, DMR, I could do VHF, FM, VHF analog, and I could do 700, 800, P25 phase 1 or P25 phase 2, trunked or conventional P25, whatever. This is the solution to the problem that we have created. And we did create this. This is a product of us. And really what it is, it's a left Twix, right Twix situation. Because how do you force someone to go on a same network? But how do you make it cost effective for them? And if you force something on there, how can you do that? And that's a big question. That's a big question in public safety radio networks. You know, who's the best salesman that can come in and talk about a network, sell you that network, but then how do you get everybody to attach onto that network? And let me tell you something. There are people in this world that in no way, shape, or form do they like it to be forced on there unless they are in charge. But that's an episode for a different time and stuff like that. But speaking about episodes and different times of opinion, here comes that age-old time on the show. You know what really bends my antenna? You know what really bends my antenna is the aspects of a lot of the communication issues that we've created have also been our problem that we have with communications. We've had to come up with these solutions, these expensive solutions too, when we're talking about connection of systems and everything on there. Now, does this mean that we all need to be a kumbaya and be on one radio network and everything like that? No, we can't. We cannot apply a blanket solution. I think if anybody wants to go ahead and take a time, they can say, when in the hell in the history of the world have we said that one solution is going to be the best solution for anybody? It's pretty much like getting into a fight with a loved one or significant other and saying, just calm down. Has never worked, nor will it ever work. Point being is that we are all going to have separate radio networks. But the question comes into is it better to allow a connection of systems, or is it better to go ahead and have individualized systems and networks on there? And the answer to that is, yep. Wait a minute. You just said yes. What is the answer? Well, it is. Well, is it better to have systems of systems connected together, or is it have everybody on the same systems? Yep. And here's why. There are going to be times and situations where one for all type system will work hands down. And there's going to be other times that that is the worst possible scenario and situation that can take place. So then the question comes into is, where does it fall? Who does that or take that burden on to be able to cause that facilitation of communications on there? And that's one that we can't answer. It really isn't. However, the part that we tend to look at is that when we in communications situations, let's put it that way, or scenarios, we tend to take the approach of, well, guess what? It's an individual person's mess and you need to fix it. Well, why is that? Why do we have that kind of thing on there? Well, because my system works fine, so why should I have to go to your system and deal with it? Yeah, that's the problem. If we have that mine is better than yours and mine is mine and yours is yours, that creates the issue, and then that causes us a result to have to go to these situations. The issue that comes up with it, though, is that there is a giant cost hurdle to take place here. How can we realistically afford someone or something to go ahead and say, you want to come play with us? Well, guess what? You have to bring your tools to the party. Once again, where do you get funding? Well, that's the issue and that's the difficulty here. What is a solution? Well, there's many solutions that are out there, but the question comes down to is, what do we want to play with and how do we want to deal with it? Same thing comes in sort of the amateur radio world. Why do we have to be so segregated? Why can't we connect systems to systems? And that's a good food for thought. Does a system always have to be connected to a system? No. But at point in times, is it going to be worthwhile for a system to connect to another system? Yes. Why can't we carve out spaces and parts of our systems to be able to be connected or linked together when the time arises or when the need to arise? We can. We have. But the problem comes into system bullies or system kings. A good thing I heard today is a person's kind of the king in their realm, right? They're the king of their pond, the big fish in their pond. And there's going to be some times that, guess what? We don't like to swim out of our pond, or we don't like to have other fish in our pond unless we say that can be. And even as it was put to me today by a person I respect, he said, sometimes you can even drown in the water, even if you're a fish. Kind of went along and said, but that kind of made me think about tonight's episode. So what is the best solution? Well, unfortunately, there is no answer for best solution. There's a best practice. And the best practice is really going to come by to make sure that the king in one castle and the king in the other castle, and they want to talk to one another, can facilitate that with ground rules. But understand that the idea or the concept that you have a ground rule today is not going to necessarily be the status quo a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. Different incidences and different situations go ahead and do arise. However, the today's solution is to be able to have end user equipment like this that allows to facilitate the interoperability. Radios that can operate on multi-bands, radios that can now be multi-protocols. I do have to give kudos to some of these public safety based radio companies that have said, you know what? Let's try to apply this solution. It may not be the solution you're looking for, but at least it is an option that can be instituted and done. Now, one of the things that we take for granted is that we think that our system is going to play well. We do. Everybody does. Whether it be amateur, whether it be GMRS, whether it be public safety, whether it be business, we know our system. We like to use our system. We don't want to use anybody else's system because that pulls us out of our comfort zone. So now that adds another layer of complexity. Once again, there's no right solution, but there are different options to help facilitate this gap. And that's what's this week's, it really bends my antenna. So thank you for tuning in to this episode. I hope this was kind of good for you. I think it's a really an emerging thing that we are going to see. And I can guarantee you, from my standpoint, even, I'm going to use my multi-band radios for some of the amateur stuff. Okay. It's going to be. I can tell you that there are VHF and UHF frequencies that are in here and that are P25 based and that are DMR based. Okay. And eventually, maybe someday they'll have next-gen in these too. Who knows? But I'm going to take advantage of that thing because guess what? It doesn't mean I need to have a series of individual radios out there. So it is kind of something that's nice and affordable in that aspect. Hopefully, as time goes on, the price is going to go down because yes, you do pay a pretty penny for convenience, and that's what it is. So thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Communications Cigars. It was live. I do appreciate that. If at always or any single time like that you have questions about the show or questions about things on there, please feel free to contact me. Communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. I do get emails from time to time. A lot of people have good questions, want a little maybe more explanation. I've said, hey, can you think about touching on this and this and this? So it is really good there. So until then, I want everybody, hey, guess what? The weather is getting better. It is. Mother Nature has been at least a little up here in Wisconsin. Go home, you're drunk, or maybe get tested for 420 day because she was crazy this past weekend. But sit back, enjoy it, stay safe, enjoy your cigars. Good weather's coming, and we'll see you at some of the different events that are coming up there. Until then, everybody.